New York, and on the new Hot 97 app. Ebro in the morning on Hot 97.
Ebro in the morning, Laura Stiles, Rosenberg. We are celebrating, or getting ready to celebrate, and giving a nod right now to the Indigenous Peoples March coming January 18th, Washington, D.C. It's a big movement, too. It's an international movement. Why don't you guys go around and introduce yourselves?
Hey, what's up, everyone? Chante Washte Napechi Zapalo, Wakangli o Machi Apalo. My name is Natani Nez Means. I come from the Navajo Nation, the Oglala Lakota Nation, and the Umaha Nation.
My name is Natalie Farfan. I'm Ecuadorian American, Indigenous woman, helping all women seeking asylum from South and Central America.
My name is Eritia Lumumba. I come from the Ketu Nation in Brazil, Candomblé, and also the Bakongo Nation in the Congo, raised in Australia though, so I'm a person of the world.
My name is 241. My colonized name is Rafael Gonzalez, and then my Dakota name is Maraju Khaga. And I'm here from Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm a water protector. I'm here, and we're fighting against the Line 3 pipeline, and we're here to talk about other Native issues that are happening on Turtle Island.
So let's start with you, 241. We are living in a time right now where, in my 43 years and almost 30 in media, this is probably the first mainstream media discussion I saw, which was around the pipeline in the Dakota Nation, right?
Yeah, Standing Rock.
Absolutely.
Rock.
Yeah.
And so do you feel, as somebody who's been active with Indigenous people, for your community, for your family, for all Indigenous people, do you feel like the conversation has reached a new height?
I think so. I feel like after Standing Rock, especially because that was a huge unification of many, many different Indigenous nations that came together. You know what I mean? There was a huge wave that happened, and I think there was a heightened level of consciousness that came from that, you know? And so right now what we're trying to do is continue on that fight, because the pipelines that are, you know, these different corporations are attempting to push through are just as big and just as dangerous as the Dakota Access Pipeline. The thing is that we don't want it to escalate the way it did, because there was a lot of violence and a lot of police repression that happened during that process. And so what we want to do is we want to spread as much awareness about it now, so we can nip it in the butt early, and we can shut this pipeline down as early as we can without having as many injuries and as much, you know, trauma and PTSD and all of that was acquired during that time at Standing Rock.
Lumumba, you from Brazil to Africa, grew up in Australia. How is what you see happening in the United States different than what you've experienced around the world?
Well, there's definitely some nuanced differences, but I just want to make it clear that we're in a global system that's interconnected, and we're all being affected by this system that is literally designed to dominate us.
Is this capitalism? Is this white supremacy? Is this white man? Which system?
You can call it that, but it all goes back to the 15th century, when there was the first international law that was created by the Catholic Church, and we refer to it as the Doctrine of Discovery. Now, the Doctrine of Discovery was when the Pope signed a document saying that anyone who travels, anyone from the European Christian monarchs, could travel to the so-called New World and literally dominate our people, because we weren't seen as humans, and we were seen as pagans, and we were subjected to Christendom. And so that really is what underpins all of it. So we can call it racism,
imperialism, colonialism,
white supremacy. Yeah, we can say that, but really what it comes down to in its modern form is this doctrine that was pushed on our people, and that's for people on the African continent, here in the Americas, Caribbean, in Australia as well, and that's what we're working on deconstructing.
And how do you feel like that's going?
Well, how do I feel it's going? It's a very hard thing to measure, but what I do know is that we're now in the fourth industrial revolution. We have access to technologies that we never had access to before. Information is able to travel instantly. You think about pre-2012, when our certain ancient calendars told us we were coming into a new age. Some people call it the age of Aquarius. For me, that's because information flows like water. The Aquarian age is about water. So what we have access to now is a new weapon. And I do know for a fact, and I think we can all attest to this, is that people are waking up. We now have this thing called the woke culture, but that needs to go to another level and needs to mature and it needs to organize. So it's a hard thing to measure, but I do know that we really can make some changes and deconstruct this system of oppression that really oppresses us all around the world.
The reason why I kind of laughed and asked how's it going is because, you know, it's a very crucial crossroads that we're at with all, because of what you pointed out with the sharing of information, right? We're on a #1 morning show in the biggest media market in America, and we openly have dialogue about everything that's going on and cover these things, to the point of mornings where I open the mic and I go, yo, just a reminder, the U.S. government stole babies, brown babies, at the border, and is indoctrinating those babies into white supremacist thinking, so that in 10, 20 years, you have brown people, right, who think like the hierarchy of society is thinking right now today. Like, that's an active thing that's taking place, and we kind of say it tongue in cheek, and you know what I mean? And some people will be like, oh man, Ebro, you're crazy and this and that. But it's, in my mind, it's really happening. We watched it happen, right? We watched babies get taken from parents.
Just now, too. It's not like you're talking about something from 70 years ago.
No, it was this 6 months ago. You know what I mean? And still right now.
Like just 24 hours ago, I got a story.
Go ahead, Natalie.
So I was, this is Nat talking. I was at Dilly Project, they're a nonprofit, and I was with there during the whole Thanksgiving week, translating for these mothers coming through the border with their children. What's happening is that some of these mothers lost 2 or 3 children. They're coming with 2 children, end up with 1. I'm like, where's the other child? The ice guy took them. Where'd they take them? They told me el hielero, which is the ice box. Literally, that's what it translates to.
What does that mean?
It's basically a box that they put them in the minute they cross the border, and it's about 10 degrees cold, and they give them like an aluminum blanket.
What is the point of that?
It's to get them sick and intimidate them and then demoralize them, really? Because at this point, now you have a mother that is in an ice box with a kid. They don't get fed for 48 hours, just water, which, by the way, I brought back. I got it tested. It's arsenic. It's got fucking arsenic, sorry about that, in the water. So these children that I saw with rashes on their body, with boogies coming out, some kid looked like he was dying. He was like maybe 6 months old. And I'm like, is he all right, man? Before we go on with the interview, she's like, he's been sick. I'm like, did you tell the ICE medical? She says, yes, they only gave him vapor rub. This kid, when I touched him, was at least 103 degrees. I find out he ended up having pneumonia, and he went into ICU for, I think, weeks later after that.
And we've been hearing about kids dying.
They're dying. They're being stolen. They're being raped, y'all. They're being raped. There's a 5-year-old little girl that got raped while she was in the facility. I had to speak to her.
When they outed an ICE agent, that was public information. They outed an ICE agent for having child porn and like a whole...
But I feel like they're probably all kind of pedophiles, and I don't trust any of them because they're working for the Trump administration, and they're being brainwashed to think that these people that are brown, that are indigenous looking, don't deserve to be treated like humans. What breaks my heart is that it goes on to these kids that are being stolen so that later they could become the Trump voters.
Well, so, there's self-hate, there's all of these other things.
And there's PTSD, and there's ancestral trauma that we're all going through. Everyone right here is going through some ancestral trauma. You know, even you, right? You're a white man, but you're Jewish, right? Like, there's so much ancestral trauma that we're still trying to decolonize. And ultimately, it comes down to these old white men that came from Europe. And we got to figure it out. But giving them the flag so they could just lead our people can't happen anymore. And one thing that's great that 241 said was, like, Standing Rock was a way of, like, higher consciousness, right? And then you mentioned, like, tongue-in-cheek, like, oh, but is this actually going to work this time? In my heart, and I was at Standing Rock with these folks, too, I feel like we are entering a place of collective mindset. And I only hope that that is the case. And we are the new majority, brown people. And that's what white people are scared of. So it's time that we understand that power and we use it with weapons like social media, with weapons like the #1 show on the radio waves, with artists that really care about humans. Like, this is a time to show up. Let's stop trying to please the white man. They need us. We don't need them anymore. That's all.
Natani, Indigenous Peoples March. This is not the first one.
This is actually the first of its magnitude, I think.
Well, I was going to say, this is the first time it's been an international affair
international,
in DC,
worldwide,
right?
and it, you know, it's happening on January 18th in Washington, D.C., we've had several instances where like people like my father, Russell Means, with the American Indian Movement, have gone to D.C. with like the longest walk in 1972, and they took over the Bureau of Indian Affairs building and trashed it. They actually took it over, and those were times when the Black Panthers, American Indian Movement, the Brown Berets were really at the height, right? And the next year was the occupation at Wounded Knee, and I'm not sure if you guys are really well versed in that, but the occupation at Wounded Knee was a 71-day siege, armed siege against the U.S. government, and that was really the beginning of awareness for American Indians or indigenous people in the Americas, and for us getting our rights back. We didn't even get the right to pray until 1978. That we were illegal to pray, and we talk about ancestral trauma with the kids at the border. This is nothing new. We have been stripped from our mother's arms since colonial times. It was a law in the early 1900s that we all had to go to boarding school. We were taken from our mothers and grandmothers at the age of 4 and put in boarding school until we're 18, and then we were let go. And we were
to indoctrinate.
Yeah, and it was by the Catholic nuns, the Catholic priests. In Canada, they call it the residential schools. Here they call it boarding schools. And we were, this is just my mother's generation. And these are people that were raped by the nuns and raped by the priests, and we have to live with that ancestral trauma, and we're barely coming out of that right now. So for these kids to have that same thing happening to them, of colonization, violent colonization, it's the same practices.
They run in the same
It's
place.
the same thing. It's the same thing, different area. Right. And it's happened in Australia. It happened in Brazil. It happened in Africa. It happened all over the world. This is just the same system.
Well, the interesting piece too is if when you look around from the Women's March, Indigenous Peoples March, Black Lives Matter, right? Where we are all having the same conversation, right? It's what I'm happy to see is Black and brown people, whether they're Asian brown people, Australian, Pacific Islander, right? South American, Central American, North American, Black people in Africa, right? All the whole Pan-African movement, like everyone's having the same conversation. I just hope and pray that we can all stay.
But that's what this march is
connected.
about on the 18th. It's about us getting together and showing our true unity and power. And in my eyes, because we were at Standing Rock, we were there for 7 months, and we felt the violent repression from what it's like to be shot, constantly tear gassed by the United States government, and what they thought of our people, what they think of our people, man. Here in the biggest superpower of the world, I come from the reservation where we've been dealing with uranium in our water since the 1950s. You want to talk about what's happening here in the United States? The world, our water is at risk. True, and until it reaches here, you don't feel the repercussions of what's happening out there here. And until you do feel it, then you're gonna get scared. Then you're gonna really feel it, because I don't get to go back to New York City or to LA or to all these places then and get lost in whatever it is that distracts me. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I have to go home to a pipeline fight. That's where we're coming from right now. I came straight from the front lines. I got my negative 30-degree boots on still, and my Pendleton jacket. And I have to go home to where the cancer is, to where our children are still being raped, to where we are still working through and being killed off. And that's something we're bringing to the march, and to bring it back to this march is to bring in a togetherness that the United States government hates. They don't want to see indigenous people rise. And when I talk about indigenous people, we talk about them worldwide. You know what I'm saying? That's why the
well, a lot of
here.
times, and it's glad you brought that up too, right? Because a lot of people forget that, Japanese people are indigenous people, right? African people are indigenous people. Native Americans.
Exactly right.
And so on and so forth. These are all indigenous people. Israelis are indigenous people. Palestinians are indigenous people.
Right.
These are all indigenous people.
Exactly right, and that's something that I find. I'm Black, and that being indigenous doesn't take away from my blackness whatsoever. being Indigenous recognizes that I have so much more to my identity than before the enslavement of my people and the colonization of my people. So I'm from the Bakongo Nation. Now, I know for a lot of people that have ancestors who were affected by the transatlantic slave trade, they can't necessarily go straight to the source and understand who their tribe is. But that doesn't really matter. It's about understanding that you're a lot more than what you have been told that you are, and that there is so much power in your tradition. There is so much power in your spirituality before Christendom. And if you're a Christian or you're of the Islamic faith, that doesn't matter either, because you can still draw on inspiration from your ancestors. And that's what they're afraid of. They're afraid of our songs. They're afraid of us playing our drums, because they understand, the scientists understand that everything is energy, and they've been able to manipulate us, manipulate our minds through their technology, through their tools. But now we're in an age where information is traveling freely, and we have the ability to be able to tap into what our ancestors were doing, tap into those ancient songs, tap into those ancient rhythms, and awaken the consciousness. And so we can really deconstruct what is taking place all around the world.
So for the average person who's watching this video and hears about all these different things that affect so many people, what's like the number one way that they could get involved and feel that they're doing something to change this massive, overwhelming, sort of intimidating worldwide problem?
Yeah, even if they can't attend the march physically.
So if you can't attend, there's a bunch of solidarity marches happening. One of the biggest ones being in Colorado. Check out indigenouspeoplesmovement.com. You can donate there. All donations are going to the elders so we can lodge them to the stage. There's going to be music. All that is cost effective. And so donating, even if it's $5 on indigenouspeoplesmovement.com is great.
Indigenouspeoplesmovement.com.
Yeah, and then we're on IG and Facebook at Indigenous Peoples Movement as well. Show love. Awareness is key. Talk to your abuela, talk to your tia, talk to your uncle. Sometimes my own grandma, she's got white hair, she got green eyes, and she's like, oh, ese negrito. Lady, you're colonized, right? Like, you only have green eyes because your abuelas and abuelas got raped for so long, right? And then here I come out with my indigenous nose. I got a nose job at 21. That's how colonized I was, because I was embarrassed of my indigenous nose. You know what I would do to get back that nose now? I don't know, but a lot, right? It's too late.
Can they reverse no job?
No.
Can you go backwards?
You might up like Michael Jackson, like rest in peace, but no thanks.
You don't want to go down
You
there.
know
You can't go back, huh?
No. Once you do it,
So
you can't
I
go
gotta
back.
span your nose now. You know what I mean? I gotta live with this truth. And I say that to women so that they understand, like, I'm not ashamed of myself. I made a mistake. I was colonized. And my mind was, I'm here now teaching the abuela that's like 80 years old, stuff that she was like, wait, I didn't know this happened. You know, so education is key. This is an international connection. I just want to reiterate, it's January 18th in Washington, D.C., in front of the Interior Affairs Building, and it's the day before the Women's March. So it's going to be a very busy weekend.
To your last statement, I also think it's important, because I know it can be frustrating in a lot of families, right, where you have elders who their mindset is definitely westernized, and it's definitely aligned with European and white supremacist ideals, and it can be very frustrating. But you also have to know a lot of that was passed down from survival mode, because celebrating our ancestry, celebrating our cultures, celebrating our stuff, I know specifically here in America, you was gonna die. Somebody was gonna kill you. And a lot of families, out of a desire to not lose their children, you know, adapted to the slave master, adapted to names, hairstyles, looks, so that they could not be killed.
Yeah, and I mean that's one thing as Indigenous people is that we're trying to bring everybody back and be like, you know, the ones that have our ways, we have our original creation stories. We suffered hundreds of years of war. We're still at war right now, you know, and we want everyone to come back to their ways. And you have help in that manner. You know what I'm saying? You guys have help in that manner. And also I want to say, because it's a hip-hop show, support Indigenous hip-hop. because
Yeah,
that's
they got some
a
guys out here. Yo, shout out to a Tribe Called Red too.
Tribe Called Red. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? 2 for 1. Myself, we're gonna be performing at the
Oh,
Indigenous.
you got bars?
I got bars,
You got
bro.
bars
I
and
got
bars?
bars. You know what I'm saying?
Hold up.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. But support Indigenous hip hop because it's a whole genre in itself. You know what I'm saying? Keyside MC, Superman, all these people that have been in it for years that are pioneers for native hip hop that have empowered me to reach out of my shell on the reservation and be proud of my culture. And that's what hip hop has done. And to be in like near the birthplace of hip hop in New York City, you know, I performed in the Bronx before with Rebel Diaz and Immortal Technique. We just got done with the show with Immortal Technique. Shout out to Immortal Technique. It's an honor because hip hop made me proud to be who I am and made me not scared to stand up against the colonizer and not scared to say, I'm this person in this country, you know, and show no fear. You know what I'm saying? So shout out to Indigenous hip hop.
That's what the point was. That's the point of hip hop. Yo, it's working, man. They ain't shut it down. It's working. It's working. Indigenous Peoples March, January 18. The site again, the IG again, so that people can
IndigenousPeoplesMovement.com.
Yep. And then IG, Facebook again at Indigenous Peoples with an S Movement.
All right, donate, guys. Donate and support.
Go ahead, 2 for 1.
Yeah, I just wanted to say one more thing. As Natani was saying, we're out in northern Minnesota and we're fighting this Enbridge Corporation pipeline called Line 3. And right now that's the active like resistance that we're a part of. It's not as big and it hasn't gotten to the point where where people are getting tear gassed and hit with rubber bullets and all of that. But we're on that border, you know what I'm saying? So what I'm trying to do is spread as much awareness. We're trying to spread as much awareness as possible about the issue right now so that it doesn't get to that point.
Well, in Standing Rock, right, you know, through, you know, during when Obama was there, it didn't happen fast enough, but ultimately it had got to a point where it got put on hold and stopped. Obama's thing came to an end. His presidency came to an end. One of the first things Trump did when he got in was open it back up.
Yep, made an executive order.
And they got it going. Oil spills did happen. Contamination did happen.
Still happening.
It's still happening now, and they're still drilling there now.
Well, he's opened up mining to so many different areas, to Oak Flat, to this place called Bears Ears National Monument in Utah. He shrunk it by thousands of acres. This is one of the sacred sites of the Navajo. He shrunk it by thousands of acres, and he's opening it up for auction on mining. So these are our sacred sites that we've had for thousands of years, and opened up Chaco Canyon for fracking. I don't know if you guys know what Chaco Canyon is. It was the epitome of trade in the early 1000 AD. You know, so these are very sacred sites that have aquifers underneath it, and they're sacred for a reason because of the minerals that are in it. And all these places are opened up for mining. Pipelines coming through underneath the Great Lakes. You know, this you were saying what, the 1/5 of the world.
1/5. So this pipeline, the Line 3 that Enbridge is attempting to push through, they want to run from Alberta, Canada, to Lake Superior, and this is the Midwest region, which is 1/5 of the world's fresh water remaining. You know what I mean? So, and people don't know that this is all at risk if they put a pipeline through. And we're talking about tar sands. Like the tar sands crude oil is the worst type of oil in the entire world. Alberta, Canada, tar sands fields is approximately the size of the state of Florida, right? And this Canadian corporation is attempting to pull all of that oil out and ship it out to foreign oil companies so that they continue to burn it, and it contributes to the CO2 levels, the higher CO2 levels, and then the warming of the earth, and then the rising sea levels. So that affects everybody's coastline. I mean, we're in New York right now. We're on the coast, you know what I mean? In Puerto Rico, where the majority of my family's at on my dad's side, they got slammed with the hurricane, you know what I mean?
The last 4 years have been the warmest years on record for the planet.
Yeah, exactly. And this is directly connected to the burning of fossil fuels. We got to keep that oil into the ground. The tar sands oil is like a very sludgy, thick material. So in order for it to flow through a pipeline, they have to chemically treat it. And so when a pipeline leaks, and all pipelines leak, there's not a single pipeline that doesn't leak, but when it does leak and it spills, it's even more toxic to the earth and to the water, and it's also very, very challenging to clean up. In 2010, Enbridge was responsible for an oil spill that spilled 1 million gallons of tar sands oil into the Kalamazoo River. That was in 2010. It's 2019, almost 10 years later, and they still have yet to clean it up. You know what I mean? So this is what we're up against right now, and we, you know, I want everybody to know, like, go to stopline3.org. That's where you can get involved and help us with our movement, because first it's about education. A lot of people just don't even know about the pipeline fight.
I think it's not knowing what to do. Feeling like even at Standing Rock, it was like we feel like we held the L, right? Like it was like people went out there, they did everything they could, and you feel like, okay, we still held the L, and it felt like the world was behind us. I think right now with the House of Representatives and the change in government that's taking place, I think that's one of the best hopes.
Well, we have a lot of Native American women there. We have Latina women there. So I've seen, there's the highest number of women in Congress, nevertheless women of color. So it's actually a very powerful time for not just women, but women of color. And that includes indigenous from all over, right? Indigenous from Africa, indigenous from the Caribbean, indigenous from North America, South America, and Central America. And this march ultimately, guys, is about decolonizing our minds. We are trapped in our own minds. We don't feel like what we're doing is enough, because we feel like for so long we've tried, we've gotten killed, we've gotten raped, and nothing. I truly believe this is the biggest march, obviously, but it's going to be the march that's going to kind of create a sense of a wave. Like people will come up, people will fight back.
Well, it's about consistency over an extended period of time, and it's going to take generations. It took generations for us to get here. It's going to take generations for us to get to a better place and there, right? The Indigenous Peoples March, January 18th. It was a pleasure talking to all of you today.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
One time, Indigenous Peoples March.